Hi, Adrien. Welcome back. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Tarun. Nice to be back.
Of course. So, today we are going to delve deeper into the specific Contemplate sports mental fitness system. Like we discussed earlier, the approach is that an athlete is a human being first, then a human being plus an athlete for a few years, and then continues to be a human being for many, many more years. Our goal is to focus on the human being part of the athlete first, and then the athlete part of the athlete. This is done in two parts. The core mental fitness training program of Contemplate focuses on the human being part of the athlete, and the sports mental fitness program focuses on the athlete part, but it always ties it back to the human being part of the athlete. It's an integrated system. So today we are going to talk about one of the lessons in the Contemplate Sports Mental Fitness program, which is training the invisible mind. Adrian, why don't you share your experience as an ex NHL hockey player and now a coach in terms of what have you seen the invisible mind do and not do? How is it relevant? How is it significant?
Well, the invisible mind is, well, obviously, it all starts when you look at an athlete and you see them, perform, you see their skill set. Um, and then what's really particular is you'll go out and you'll look at a player in practice and training and you'll go, wow, they can skate, they can shoot, they have all these skills that are, you know, pretty amazing. Yet they'll be in a game where all of a sudden there's pressure, there's expectations, there's demands, and they won't be as effective. So you ask, okay, what is the difference? What has happened, where you notice this player, you noticed his skills, his abilities, yet they were invisible, in the game. They couldn't display their skills. And I think that's really, if you were to explain the invisible mind, is like, okay, what sort of has happened? And so the context is different, from, training and practicing and then playing in a real game under expectations with all the pressure as the pressure mounts. Well, then, certain players shine more and others sort of disappear. And so the invisible mind, I think, is really responsible for that. It's what's going on within the athlete, within the human being, like we say, what's happening within them for that to happen. And in ice hockey, we would often say, oh, he's a good practice player. But ultimately, you want to be a good, you want to be a player that performs, when the moment needs it most, you're performing at your best.
Yeah, and yesterday when we were speaking, you were mentioning, I think, an incident when you were traded to, was it Vancouver or I'm not sure. Do you want to
Correct.
talk about that incident?
Sure. So I was traded because obviously, again, scouts, when they go out and they watch scouting, what is evident to me is as you're, in these junior level and in youth hockey, there's a bigger discrepancy. So your skill, might cover up some of your what's going on in the invisible mind, the weaknesses, the things that are not being seen, the fears, they're not as, you don't see them as much because your skill level is much better than others. But as you move more, as you go up in levels, all of a sudden there's better players. And, everybody has the same sort of skill level. So what you used to be able to do, or should I say that now the difference between the players and whether one player succeeds or, even grows more and reaches his potential, it's what's happening in the invisible mind. So my story is I was drafted second round by St. Louis and they saw potential. They could see how I could skate. They could see that I had some major potential. But when I went and I played, well, maybe they saw, okay, we expected more from him. Or perhaps Vancouver wanted, saw something in me. So sometimes, obviously, when there's a trade, a team has to be willing to give you up and a team has to be willing to take you. But what they were saying is uh, that I wasn't really showing all the potential I had. So it was something like they said, what was, I have all the tools, but I couldn't display them. I couldn't display the tools. So
Tools,
they,
but
I
not the
ended up,
toolbox. I think that's what you
yes,
said. I remember.
that was the way they quoted it or that I heard of it. But I think partly they couldn't see what was going on within me. They couldn't see that I struggled with the anxiety. They couldn't see that, I was putting an enormous amount of pressure on myself, negative pressure, because there's such a thing as good pressure. So the invisible mind really is is the very thing that allows you to, show your gifts, and it liberates you. It allows you to, to be liberated, to be free. So when, it's time to perform, you forget about the crowd, you forget about the expectation, you forget, about the pressure, the coach, the GM, the city, and you simply go to playing what you know how to play because ultimately it's playing hockey. For me, it was playing hockey. And the blessed players do that. They kind of forget about everything and they get immersed in what they're doing. And I think that's sort of called flow state when you're doing it at your best. And there's a disconnection from the personal self, the ego. The ego measures, oh, what if I make a mistake? What if I screw this up? Well, if the personal self is too active, is there's too much going on in the invisible mind, your performance will suffer ultimately. So it's really about letting go and knowing that all the work that I've done, that, I'm gonna, release it. And it's the subconscious takes over and you're simply going out to perform and your your ego is really in the background. So there's no sort of, oh, there's something to lose here, or my self-worth is at risk if something goes wrong. I think separating those two is so important. And I think the invisible mind kind of holds the key to that.
And I think what you're saying is, like you explained, players are thrown on the court, on the field, on the rink, and they are expected to perform magical feats, mental feats, without being trained to do so. So there is expectation without training. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly expectations without training is, you know, I mean, you as a junior player or playing in youth hockey, you played in front of your parents, maybe 100 people, maybe a little bit more. And now all of a sudden, take me, age of 19, growing up in a, I grew up in a little bit introverted, growing up with a real simple family life, and now you're thrown in front of 20,000 people, and there's no sort of training in that. But I think like I see this again, it relates back to the ego, if there's too much at risk, you're going to feel like you're going to feel that pressure more, and so maintaining a certain, I think sometimes I see the most simple players, like, who their sense of self and the human being remains, whether they have fame or they don't have fame, they remain who they are, because they're not, their sense of self is not identified to what they do. But going back to what, we all sort of, these pressures that are in pro sports, they're there, but no one really talks about it. No one shows us, you know, if you're anxious, no one tells us, okay, how to relax, when you're in a championship game. Is like, just go out and do it, just play your best. But we don't, we prepare a player physically for the season. We do all this weight training, this speed building. We work on the physical aspect, but we don't do anything for the invisible mind. We don't, ask a player like, how do you want to show up when, you're playing in front of 20,000 people, where, one game can decide the championship? How do you get someone to perform even better in playoffs than the regular season when there's more at cost? We don't talk about those things. So the expectations are there, but there's no mental training system. There's no system to help someone with that.
And I would say things like what you were mentioning to me yesterday. Do I want the ball in the last 10 seconds? Do I want to hide behind other players in the group? Those things again relate directly to the invisible mind. What have you seen in those areas?
Well, it's exactly that. It's you, you know, when you look at internally, when I talk about the invisible mind, it triggers all these internal responses that are happening within the body. And so a great example is, you look at Tom Brady, he was like a fifth string quarterback. I don't know where he was, but he had to, he had to go through the growing pains, and he wouldn't get as many reps as the first guy. So his 3 reps, as quarterback, where you get a chance to be in the play, well, he had to make the best of it. But what was said about him was he was too slow. He wasn't dynamic enough. His arm, I don't know what was said about his arm, but within himself as a human being, there was a great calm, there was a poise, there was a sense of like he knows who he is. You can see he's really comfortable with who he is. And that sort of what was inside him, the invisible mind, the human being aspect, well, that really allowed him, like when you look at under pressure, when you look at a quarterback who's can has to make these quick decisions while he's being chased by these, guys who are 300 pounds, and he can stay cool. You know, he has this expanded vision, peripheral vision, and can make the play. how do you measure that? How do you measure that? So everybody said, oh, he's too slow, he's that, but he ends up being one of the all-time greatest quarterbacks because that you cannot measure. You cannot measure what someone's experience within. And everybody knows when you're stressed or you're in survival, the survival part of the brain, when you're in fight or flight, fight, freeze, and fight, flight, and freeze, your experience of time will be different than whether you're able to manage your state, whether you feel like comfortable, in front of 20,000 people. Well, all these things, if we go down to the roots and we sort of, understand why is there that anxiety, a little bit is maybe good, a little bit of excitement, of anxiety, but when it becomes too much, then it works against you. But all these things, if we sort of uncover them and we start training them and teaching players how to relax, how to activate the part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest, get them to go to those places where all of a sudden they feel relaxed, even though they're performing in front of 20,000 people. That can have amazing, effects and results on someone's performance and allow them to display their gifts when it counts most.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up a few things which we will be discussing in our future series because we have lessons for flow state and peripheral vision and all of that. So I do not want to delve into those right now. Let's stay focused on the invisible mind part. Can you tell me how this relates to two specific situations? One, if an athlete is injured, and two, you are on the bench, not because of an injury. How does the invisible mind come into play in these two situations?
Well, I can only speak from my experience. When I look at injuries and accidents, car accidents and all these little mishaps, often in my experience, when there was injuries, there was a lot going on, overthinking in the mind. There was a stress, and when you're overthinking, when you're in your head, when you're performing, you're supposed to be free. It's like your instincts take over, your subconscious takes over. You're just going out and having that experience. And when there's a lot going on, that simply means you're not going to be fully present. So you're going to be, a step behind. You won't be, you know, your vision will not be as expanded. You won't have as much feel on your stick. You won't feel the puck, when my game was on and I was relaxed, I could feel the puck. I didn't even have to look down. I knew the puck was on my stick. But when you start overthinking, doubting, and you start looking down, and all of a sudden there's the mind that's too active, that's overthinking. And I would say often, like many of my injuries, there was a level of stress that I was experiencing, and then all of a sudden, there's an injury that happens. So I think definitely, it's like, well, you're not fully present. So if you're not fully present, you're going to miss something, there's you won't see, you won't your awareness won't be, fully there to read what's in front of you. Your reactions will be slower, and that's how I would relate it to injuries. And then in terms of, being on the bench, um, you again, that personalized self. If Tom Brady, I don't know how many years he was like the fifth string, then he was the third string, and then eventually he got his chance. If he didn't, fully apply himself when he was the fifth string, he probably would have never got the chance there to be the first string. But that also built him, it built him. So he learned to be a team player. He learned to see what was going on. So even though you might not have the minutes and you're on the bench, you're still playing. You're playing, even though you're not playing, you're still playing, you're still contributing. And there's many ways to contribute. And that also, that's part of, uh, being part of a team sport. And you say sometimes it's like the growing pains, you have to learn to be part and support others. And I think what's evident to me is the great leaders now, in terms of they obviously have a skill set, like their skills are even better than others, but they look to make other players better. So their the focus is less on their own personal points and gains. And there was a beautiful video that I shared with you of the football
Yeah.
player where the coach came to him. I know you're 10 yards away from breaking your record. I think it was, for Russia's yards in a game. And he says, no, let the young boys have their lunch, meaning let them have the experience, because he felt so sure. And it was more important to have team success, to have, the greater good of all versus just his personal accolades. And that's someone who's really secure, someone where he feels, okay, I'm like, part of this group, and I see the others, I see they're contributing to my success. And so I think um, that's, I guess, how I would put it. So, yeah, knowing how you can contribute, maybe even though you might not have, the minutes or that significant role, but if you keep doing the right things and you keep showing up in the right way, you're going to get a certain level of success. And those things are more and more recognized by coaches and by organization, thankfully.
Yeah, and all of this, what you mentioned as examples, so trying to focus on yourself rather than on the team, these are very natural human instincts, but they are not necessarily good for your long term peace of mind. I think that's the only thing which training can help you realize and then work on. Just because it is instinctive doesn't necessarily mean it is good for me. Just because the loudest voice in my head says, focus on yourself, the loudest voice is not necessarily the right voice every single time. So I think what you're saying is the physical body, the physical actions are visible, so they get a lot of attention because you can see them. But let's not forget who is driving those physical actions, and that's the invisible mind. I think that's what you say. What would you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, it's the ego, If the if if the ego needs, if you're listening to that, you said the part of you that always needs, to feel superior. The other part of feeling superior is like you're that superiority comes from feeling inferior. So it's always about sort of feeding the ego that's always hungry, that's never satisfied. So it comes from a place of us that's very insecure and deficient.
Yeah,
I think, great, like I said, great leaders, they don't need to say they're the best. They simply go out and they, do their thing. They do their thing and they let the performance and, let people say what they will say. But I guess does that sort of tie up well what you were
yeah,
explaining?
absolutely. Think there is no such thing as a superiority complex. It is always a deep rooted inferiority complex that is at play. So you explained it perfectly. I think that's the invisible mind essentially drives everything that we see. So, yes, completely in agreement with you, Adrian. Thank you so much for your thoughts, and your insights are very valuable. You have a lot of experience. And I'll see you again soon for our next video in the series. We pick up another topic from the sports program and then talk about it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.